Very happy to be talking to Elliot Mintz. Elliot Mintz was the youngest talk show host in the United States at the age of 21, and I have to admit, back in the 60s and 70s, I listened to his interview shows back on KPFK in L.A., KMET, KMET in L.A., KLOS, and some of the greatest interviews on Sunday nights. We used to sit around and listen to them and just kind of turn the lights down and just kind of go with it. So how cool. I say good morning to Elliot Mintz. How you doing, Elliot?
I feel well today, Alan. Thank you for the kind words.
Well, listen, great interviews. And let me start by saying this. First of all, I want you to look back and tell me what were some of your favorite interviews?
I get asked that from time to time, and the reality is that some of the ones that I found to be the most intriguing, I did over 2,000 interviews during my broadcast years, are actually done with people whose names are not immediately recognizable. People who are into meditation and metaphysics and things of that nature that just were illuminating to sit in a room with an Alan Watts or a Baba Ram Dass. But unfortunately, most people don't know who those folks are. So among the more well-known people, I guess it's fair to say that my early conversations with John Lennon and Yoko Ono remain my most memorable. Those go back to around 1971. I would interview John and Yoko, 4, 5, 6 times on radio, and John once on KABC television in Los Angeles. He comes to mind, both of them come to mind as being fairly remarkable people. I think, sitting and having a lengthy, in-depth conversation with Bob Dylan was illuminating, a unique experience, something he didn't do a lot of interviews then. He certainly doesn't do many now. That one rang true to my heart. I found David Cassidy to be a complex person who moved between being a teenage heartthrob and a very cerebral and I felt somewhat lonely person. And then there are people like Donna Summer, and it's very difficult. I have 5 godchildren, and when people ask me which one is my favorite, I say the same thing. There's something about each of them that I find memorable, even some of the interviews that I felt went absolutely nowhere.
You know, I did interview David Cassidy, and you described exactly how I felt about him also. I mean, that was my impression. Somewhat lonely. He was also somewhat inebriated when I interviewed him, and he's very cerebral. And when I first came to Las Vegas, I interviewed him, and I thought that he had potential to really take off in a second career, and things have unfortunately not gone as well for him in the last several years. But he was a very interesting interview. Were you ever surprised in any of your interviews?
Oh, almost all of them. There was, back in the day when I was doing this kind of stuff, there wasn't the kind of time commitment that there is now. My shows, for the most part, were on FM radio. They were on very late at night. The air shift would go for 2, 3, 4 hours, sometimes longer. And my overall policy with interviews was that as long as something intriguing was being said, we would just keep talking. And that's why some of the interviews went on for hours. Once you have somebody on the phone or in studio for that amount of time, there's always something that's going to seep through. I found it intriguing one day when I was interviewing Ricky Nelson, who was kind of like the boy next door that we grew up with in Ozzie and Harriet. And just off the top of my head, I asked him who he voted for in the previous election. And he told me that he had voted for Dr. Spock, Dr. Benjamin Spock, who's been running as an independent. I found that intriguing. I found Jack Nicholson's, I interviewed Jack 3 or 4 times. He didn't do many, but he was my neighbor. We became friends, and he agreed. And he liked coming to the radio station. He even took phone calls from listeners. And one night in a discussion, he made a reference to the fact that we never really recover from the separation from our mothers during the process of childbirth.
Wow.
I was prepared to talk with him about one of his films or something of that nature. He was in the mood that evening to discuss theology. So you've been doing this for a long time. You know that if you catch people at a certain time, you're going to be surprised. Larry King also once was asked, "What's the most important question you can ask somebody on radio and television?" And Larry's response to that was, "Why?"
Okay.
So when you ask a person a question, they're going to give you an answer. In many cases, if you've been interviewed 1,000 times before, it's an answer that they've given 1,000 times before. After they've given you the answer, then you say, "Why do you feel that way?" Not just interested in your position, interested in what led up to it. So I think that that's where you open the door to greater inquiry. Every time I did that, or almost every time I did that, with a superstar or somebody who was of interest to me, I learned something.
I want to talk about some of the people some of these superstars you interviewed. I also want to talk about in a moment about if you feel any of these interviews changed you in any way, because I know you interviewed Timothy Leary, Alan Watts. I do know who he is, and I have interviewed Ram Dass before, and so, I'm fascinated to hear what your thoughts are on some of these people. So if you'd stay with me, we're going to take a quick break and find out about traffic, and come on back and continue our discussion with Elliot Mintz, one of the foremost interviewers and talk show hosts ever, and thrilled to be able to have him with us this morning. I'm Alan Stock, and this is News Talk 720 KDWN. I'm talking with Elliot Mintz. Elliot Mintz, one of the youngest talk show hosts ever, and also a great interviewer. Got the chance to hear many of his interviews back in the late 60s, early 70s, usually on Sunday nights as we stayed up with the darkened room and everything like that. It was always very, very cool. I want to know, first of all, do you feel that any of these interviews changed you in any way? And I'm asking you because I know you interviewed philosophers like Timothy Leary and Alan Watts and Ram Dass, and the change that Ram Dass I know went through a lot. I've had the chance to have him in my studio and interview him. But you feel these interviews changed you in any way?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, the three that you just picked would be examples of that. Ram Dass, for our friends who are listening, he used to be named Dr. Richard Alpert. He was a professor at Harvard, a psychologist, and he, along with Dr. Timothy Leary, back in the day, popularized the conscious experimentation with LSD. Timothy Leary would go on to tour the college campuses discussing the drug, advising people to, quote, turn on, tune in, and drop out. He later became a fugitive from the law. Richard Alpert went to India, believing that there might be a better way to alter one's consciousness for a longer period of time, found a guru who gave him some secrets, came back with the title Baba Ram Dass, which in Hindi means student of God, and he would go on. He's still with us. He lives in Hawaii. We became friends, exchanged letters. Timothy Leary became my next-door neighbor where I lived.
What was that like, living next door to Timothy Leary?
Well, he would come to my house frequently. I would visit him at his. He invited me to a variety of his parties. He asked me to co-author his autobiography.
Wow.
And we spent a number of evenings with a tape recorder running for 3, 4, or 5 hours, having discussions which later were to be turned into a book. We wound up never publishing the book, and I wound up with some very intriguing tapes. But spending a night with Timothy Leary, he did change the way I saw the world. He was one of the most revolutionary explorers of consciousness, the potential of the brain, obviously a very controversial man. because of his association with LSD, which at the time in California was legal. It was not. It was something that perhaps hundreds of thousands of college-age kids took, not just to, quote, get high, but the belief that you could open your mind and your brain to greater thoughts. As a result of that, his life became somewhat of a nightmare, and he spent years in prison for being arrested somewhere and being in possession of two joints.
Wow, incredible. And Alan Watts also, I know, lived in Marin County, and we used to watch him and his tapes and everything. Another fascinating character. Absolutely. I want to run through some names for you and ask you just to give me one word to describe each one of these, please.
Okay.
All right. Timothy Leary.
Revolutionary.
Alan Watts.
Inspiring.
Salvador Dali.
Disappointing.
John Wayne.
Fantastic.
Groucho Marx.
I was in awe.
Jack Nicholson.
Smartest actor I've ever met.
Allen Ginsberg.
Privileged to talk to him.
John Lennon.
Changed everything.
Mick Jagger.
Better on stage.
Bob Dylan.
The best.
And Ram Dass.
Fascinating.
Yeah, you've interviewed some fascinating people, and I've only given a small little niche of some of these. And you're right, a lot of people may not have ever heard of Alan Watts before, as well as Ram Dass, formerly Richard Alpert. Everybody's heard of Timothy Leary, and we know the song from the Moody Blues, Timothy Leary. So, but, some fascinating characters you've interviewed. I've got very little time, but I've got to ask you this. I know your career was launched after the death of JFK when you discovered a classmate you knew Lee Harvey Oswald, and they were in the Marines together. Real quickly, what was that interview like?
I was 17, 18 years old, just arrived in L.A. It was November 22nd, 63. We were watching the unfolding tragedy on television, and when a photograph of the suspect appeared on TV, the man behind me said, "Hot damn, that's Lee." And within minutes, I asked if he would go into another room with me and just recall what it was like in the Marine Corps with Lee Harvey Oswald. He described it. I brought the tape home, offered it to the All News radio station, and before the sun had set, I had heard it on the network news. It was the first insight that anyone had gotten into the man who was then believed to have been the shooter. It was just what I call being in the right place at the wrong time. I guess it launched my broadcast career on one of America's darkest days, and it just shows you the power, the magic, the mystery of radio, of meeting people under the most peculiar of circumstances, and how a single conversation can alter the destiny of your life.
Incredible stuff. Real quickly, are you going to release, do you think, that book that you wrote with Tim Leary?
No plans on doing it. We never finished the book. I had a very nice chat a few days ago with his son, Zach, who's about to release a documentary that's all about life with Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, which I was able to see. Most of these clips that we've talked about, I've made available for free on my website for people to listen to if they choose.
What is the website, Elliot?
It's easy. ElliotMintz.com. ELLIOTMINTZ. If people go on that, there's no charge. They can listen to virtually every person who we mentioned in your broadcast today.
I encourage everyone to, at one time or another, check it out, because Elliot Mintz was is one of the all-time great interviewers, and I know other people have got their ideas who they like to hear interview, but you were a great interviewer, and the invitation's open. When you come to Las Vegas at some point, I'd like to have you in studio. We could sit down and chat more about some of these people and some of your life interviewing some of these famous folks.
I plan on being there next month for a convention, and I'm going to take you up on it, Alan. And by the way, in the area of fine interviewing and techniques, you got it down.
I appreciate that from the master, Elliot Mintz. That is quite a compliment. Elliot, I want to thank you for being with me. I appreciate it, and look forward to having you in studio perhaps next month. Travel safely, my friend.